Today on the show, we are not cultivating desert power. We are desert power.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Was that good? Was that okay?
I'm kind of hyped up now.
Yeah. Hell yeah, we're desert power. Worm roar.
Worm roar.
Worm roar.
Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name's Abu.
My name is Leo.
And Leo, we're here to close it out.
We're doing it.
SyFy Channel's Children of Dune, Part 3, the final episode, the end of this iconic story and this iconic miniseries.
It's true. I think we should make broad and dramatic changes to how we normally do episodes that confuse and a little bit frustrate listeners.
Yeah.
Just to be in theme with how this episode
I love it.
I
love it.
Yeah.
Great. So the game plan for today is that we're going to start with a rap battle.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go into some poetry that you and I have written.
But ASMR poetry.
Yeah,
ASMR
exactly.
poetry.
ASMR poetry. A lot of mouth noises.
And then just suddenly loud noises. Really loud.
Yeah. What do you think about throwing in a worm roar? How are you feeling about a worm roar?
Worm roar! Roar! I'm a worm! Oh my gosh.
All right, so clearly we have feelings. We have feelings and they cannot be contained. But let's contain them for 2 more minutes, Leo. 2 more minutes.
Sure.
Because we need to make Shout Out Mapes proud and take care of some housekeeping before we talk about this episode. First and foremost, a spoiler warning. Today's episode contains spoilers for Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune, the first 3 books in the Dune saga. So if you have not read those, go do that first and then come back and listen, because we're talking about like end game Children of Dune stuff, literal final scene stuff.
Yeah, literally the end of the book.
Exactly. Lucky for you, we have deep dive, chapter by chapter book club episodes that are spoiler free for new readers on all 3 of those books. So you have no excuse. Get to reading.
0 excuses. It's only like 3,000 pages. It's fine.
What else do you have going on in your life? Bills? Family?
A job?
Friends?
Cringe.
Job?
Embarrassing.
Ugh, get your priorities straight.
And one of your priorities should be, how do I support this great podcast that I like?
Great segue.
Thank you. So the best way to support us and what we do here at Gom Jabbar is to become a patron over at patreon.com/Gom Jabbar. You can get ad-free episodes. That's what you get. You get in exchange for your support, ad-free episodes, weekly bloopers, as well as some cut content and other kind of weekly goodies. For instance, I'm taking scene-by-scene notes for these 3 episodes and posting them to the Patreon. So if you are curious about that sort of thing, that's included.
Yeah, and they are extensive, folks. Let me just be clear. I was like, oh, he probably like opened the notes app on his phone, jotted down some bullet points. It's like 9 pages
per episode,
of thoughts that is broken down scene by scene.
Yeah.
It's incredible. You need to sign up to be a patron and go check that out.
It's long-winded at the very least, but that's on brand.
Indeed.
If you want any of that, become a patron over at patreon.com/Gom Jabbar. And as always, we have to shout out our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons. Case Aiken, Matthew Good. Gentlemen, although it's never explicitly stated what our relationship to you is, like whether it's like romantic or platonic or whatever.
Yeah.
Your support makes us so appreciative. When we do show you physically our appreciation, people are going to be like, is this incest? Is this more than, I don't know. It's kind of all right. It's debatable.
Yeah. We'll kiss you on the mouth.
We will smooch you.
That's a promise. Only if you want to.
It's not listed on the tiers of Patreon, but You read between the
It's
lines.
on the table.
There. It's on the table. It's true. Thank you, gentlemen. Seriously.
Thank you for your support. Another great way to help us out here on the podcast is to check out our merch store, gomjabarshop.com. We got custom Dune themed merch on that store, folks. There's apparel, there's art, there's mugs, there's this beautiful tote bag with a cute little Muad'Dib mouse on it, and so much more. So go check it out and snag something nice for yourself, or a lover, or a sibling.
Oh, yes. Finally, we do love to hear from you, especially if you have ideas for things that you'd like to hear from us. So email us, gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com. Best way to reach us. We want to know what you think about this miniseries. Email us your hot takes. Email us your opinions. I have the email open now, and I see that people have been doing that. It's excellent. And although this is the last episode that we're going to talk about this series, if you send something that is like poignant that we want to share, we have mailbag episodes coming up that we will talk about them.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about the real game plan for today's episode.
Yeah.
Sadly, for those of you looking forward to the ASMR poetry, not happening. Not today,
Right.
at least.
Not today.
The game plan for today is the same as it was for episodes 1 and episodes 2. We'll debrief about part 3 and call out some of the notable changes, which there are aplenty.
Indeed.
And then we'll share 2 things that we liked about the episode and 2 things that we disliked. And finally, we'll wrap up by sharing our favorite scenes and discussing our brief overall thoughts on the series as a whole, now that we've completely wrapped it up. So we'll get into all of that after a quick break. So don't go anywhere, dear listener. We will be back in just a minute to wrap up our conversation on SyFy's Children of Dune miniseries.
Welcome back, everybody. Let's do it. Let's talk about the final episode of the Children of Dune miniseries. The first thing we want to talk about broadly are some notable differences between the miniseries and the book. And by a fucking margin, this episode changed the most. And we have feelings about that, but let's just talk about some of the changes first. Just the facts.
Just the facts first. We'll get to the feelings in a minute.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, the thing that immediately changed at the start of this episode is that there is no the twins plotted to fake Leto's death plan here.
Right.
It is just Leto's plan. He intentionally tricks Ganima or allows her to think that he was killed by Tony the Tiger.
Right.
And in this episode, we see him standing off on another dune or something, looking out and being like, sorry, Ganima, I had to pull this ruse or
Right.
whatever. And she heads back to Siege Tabur. So that's entirely different here. It's not a plan they came up with together. It's something that Leto did on his own.
Yeah.
Another big change is what happens to Leto next. Because as we know in the book, he gets abducted. He goes into that forced spice trance because of Namri and Gurney. And a similar thing happens in this episode, but the reason it happens is never explained. Because in the book, it is because of Jessica and the Bene Gesserit and their plans to test Leto, test him for abomination, test him to see if he's worthy for the throne, what his powers are as a preborn and as a Kwisatz Haderach. All of that is why Leto is abducted by Gurney and why he is brutally and uncomfortably force-fed spice to the point of near death.
Right, yeah.
And a lot of that is sort of compressed down and shortened and simplified in this episode. And the Bene Gesserit / Jessica reason behind it is omitted entirely.
Right. It's like a cast out is like, we're going to make him go insane like Ali is insane. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Why? Or just to get at them? Or okay. Fair enough.
Exactly.
Yeah, Gurney's not there. He's somewhere else.
Yeah.
He's lost in the desert. And actually along those lines, his abduction sequence is so dramatically shortened.
Yeah.
It's not like 2 months of him out in the desert being forced to this thing and meeting Sabiha and having this whole thing. It's literally just he's there for a minute and then he wakes up and he's like, oh, wait, no, I'm good. I'm good now. Bye, Sabiha. No riddle game, no like going out, coming back. None of it. Just he's there for a bit, has a dream, and is good.
Yeah. It's not even entirely clear what changed. He kind of just goes Super Saiyan.
Yeah. He's like, no, I'm good
but
now.
his hair doesn't turn yellow. There's no aura. He just like, we have to assume he goes Super Saiyan because that's what he tells Sabiha. It's like, I'm fine. I'm not possessed. Get out of my face.
He drinks the spice essence, right? He kind of just like,
oh, that's right. He does flex on her.
He's like, look, I'm good. And she's like, damn, he just did a whole shot. That was a double shot.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. He does do that.
Shotguns a few beers. She's like, this guy's rad as fuck. He's like, bye.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't get the long extended chapters that we do get in the book that follow his journey and make us realize, A, how awful and painful this whole forced trance situation is, B, the sort of mental and metaphysical awakening he's having about time and space and his abilities
his
and the
first
future.
ancestor, like the early ancestor.
Exactly. All of that is sort of not here. He just kind of goes Super Saiyan and takes a shot.
Yeah. It was rad as fuck, though. It was very impressive. Coolest frat dude I've ever met. We also get this choice. Stilgar attacks Arrakeen. Maybe you can tell how we feel about it. Stilgar attacks Arrakeen with an army of worms.
Yeah.
Rather than going out into the desert to like return to the old Fremen ways.
Yeah. I will say he starts an attack on Arrakeen.
Oh, right.
They're at the border.
And then encamps.
And then encamps.
I'm scared. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do this anymore. Stilgar, we talked about this. You have to. Stilgar, you can't keep encamping on the verge of attack.
On the verge of attack.
But I'm scared. What if they don't like me?
Yeah. It's a tough choice. We'll talk more about that later. Another change in this episode is Wensissia's fate.
Yeah.
Instead of being exiled, as she is in the book, she falls victim to, honestly, like this very incredible dupe from Farad'n, who on the day of the wedding straight up rats out his mother. He's like, yeah, no, she trained the tigers. I saw it happen. I had nothing to do with it,
Yeah.
And we'll talk about it because I actually loved that scene.
Sure. Yeah.
And I have some thoughts on it, but that was a change. Is Wensissia's fate in the book is sort of just off page. She is exiled and we never kind of see her again. Here, it's this like dramatic wedding scene.
Yeah. And I'm not even sure what happens to Wensissia in this miniseries. Like, she's taken away by guards. So in prison, maybe. But I also can't remember what happened to her in the book, other than that she was exiled from like the Carino Palace on Seleucus Secundus. And I'm like, is that a death sentence? Is she dead now? Either way, that's a big difference. And then we get this, it's a combination of scenes. And it's Alia in the crowd listening to the preacher talk, and then him grabbing her and going, stop trying to pull me back into the spotlight, sister.
Right.
It's that scene combined with the scene where he's finally in the Arrakeen city and he's knowing that he's going to die as part of this golden path.
Right.
It's those two scenes combined, basically, which as a viewer was a little bit confusing because we see her up at her keep.
Right.
Super far away, and he's echoing in the distance as he's talking. And then she's in the audience and kind of disguised. So she tobogganed down very quickly and managed to be next to him during his final performance. And he's killed, instead of by one of her priests, he's killed by Muriz. Cast out Jacarudu fella, father of Asan.
Who screams Jacarudu at the end too, in case
you weren't
They're
sure.
very strong on the branding. They're like, you have to yell Jacarudu. How will they know we did it?
Yeah, their social media person is on top of it.
For sure.
He's like, guys, remember, whatever you're doing, Jacarudu! You parked your car especially well, you got to scream out Jacarudu.
Yeah, you must. I do.
I do too.
When I get that perfect parallel parking spot in the city.
Yes, Jacarudu,
baby.
Startles the passengers in your car. Yeah.
So those are some of the more notable changes. There are many more smaller ones sprinkled here and there. And as with the last two episodes, some of the scenes are condensed or combined, like that Alia scene and the preacher death scene, or shortened or tweaked. And I would say, compared to episodes 1 and 2, here it does make a dramatic difference.
Sure.
I think the number of changes and the creative decisions made in this episode stack up to ultimately create something that I think deviates pretty wildly from the source material
Right.
in ways that I'm personally not fans of and that we'll talk about today. But I think before we get to what we didn't like, let's focus on the positives, because there is still plenty to love in this episode as well.
Yeah.
So let's actually start by talking about the two things that we loved about this episode in particular. And I'll let you kick it off for us today.
Sure. There was a lot to like. And I also want to stress that this is maybe a weak third chapter in a very strong overall product.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'll come back to that point as we go throughout this episode, but just to emphasize, like, there's some really good stuff across the last 3 episodes.
Yeah.
My pick for this is that despite some wild changes that very much deviate from maybe the original text and the original characters and their choices and their motivations, there were surprising moments of heart and surprising moments of like really moving, beautiful, like human moments that I think demonstrated a very solid understanding of the characters. And of course, I've selected a few in these John Harrison Winoff script, but I think feeling a connection to the characters and their feelings and feeling that real empathetic response to maybe even scenes that didn't resonate me with Frank's book is surprising to me and is cool and I think should be celebrated. So first, I want to talk about Leto and Paul talking on the dune as Asan Tariq releases the worm. He's got that little chore to do. And Paul touching Leto's hand was really sweet. Was just a nice, beautiful little moment. I know in our conversation about the book, we talked about how Leto's response to that is no knife can harm me and like no poison can. And we were talking about how it could have been a father touching his son for the first time, really. Or it could also have been him maybe seeking out, is there some way for me to still kill him and stop him from doing this terrible thing? But in this adaptation, it was just all sweet for me. James McAvoy is just electric throughout this episode. And I think that during this scene, he was really beautiful in the way he presented those character choices. Alec Newman hissing at him angrily was a different, slightly different choice, but it's fine. That scene had some moments where I was really touched. It's just like seeing the father and his son talk about what has to be done.
Yeah, that scene really worked for me too. I mean, it was sort of an abridged version of the scene that played out in the book.
Right.
And I think some of, as you stated, some of the layers of that conversation were simplified.
Right.
I think it was more heartfelt than the book portrayed, because in the book, there is some very clear antagonistic energy going on here between father and son. Here, I think they leaned into the more heartfelt aspect of it, where it is a father reuniting with a son and these two prescient, all-powerful, messianic beings finally being able to talk to someone who understands.
Right.
And I did enjoy that part of it. So I think the simplification here worked for the most part.
Yeah. I think there's lots of reasons why it would work or doesn't work. The second moment kind of gets to, again, another McAvoy praise element, but it's along these lines. When he responds to Gurney's like, what about your aunt? And he goes, my aunt is lost. There was a real, like, him and his father on the sand dune was touching and more emotional, kind of in the same way that Jessica is more sympathetic throughout than it was in the book. But also, like, these moments where he says, my aunt is lost, is just a declaration. It's not melodramatic. It's not this, like, hyperbole of this is the curse of abomination and this is what it could have been so much more, and they could have made that decision, especially considering some of the other actors and their choices throughout. But the fact that it was just such a simple declaration, it was just such a simple little moment, I was like, wow, fuck, that's sad. And that's very well done. That little moment was really beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. I think the restraint there worked well. I think even in the book, Leto and many of the more powerful prescient beings in the book
Yeah.
tend to like to talk in circles.
Yeah.
And some of that is part of their mystique, right? They got to keep up the I am a prophet, so I say
Sure.
things you don't understand.
Yeah.
I am totally with you on this. I liked the directness of this because it really helps the audience understand too that there is no redemption here
Right.
for Alia. My aunt is gone.
Right.
Full stop.
It's also the sort of language that Gurney would respond well to, right? Like Gurney Halleck is not someone who wants you to beat around the bush, and he will spout prose until the cows come home, but he's Gurney Halleck. So giving him that sort of direct, like, no, we don't need to talk about that. She's gone.
Yep.
The next thing I have on my list is Farad'n owning his narrative, admitting the Carino Tiger plot. Like, we'll talk about that scene later, but it's just amazing. Like, that whole little sequence was great. And when he turns to Ganima and he pivots it and says, like, this is my present to you, is like that truth. And then he like puts himself, literally he kneels and is like, your move. I am at your disposal, but I showed you my character in this moment. I was like, fucking, they did it. I like Farad'n. I like Farad'n a lot. That was really great. And it was also something that I think very much invented for the miniseries, is not even remotely from the book. But I do think, from what we know about Ganima's character from the book, that is the sort of thing that Ganima would be like, wow, yeah, I respect the honor of that and the courage and the bravery, in the same way that Jessica, despite herself, is impressed by that troubadour. And she's like, he's got the audacity to say some shit.
Yeah.
That's the kind of guy that Leto would like. That's the kind of guy that House Atreides is built upon. Farad'n demonstrated in that little scene, this character moment demonstrates that he is very much an Atreidian sort of guy, and just beautifully done. I thought that was like super well written. It was great.
So well done that it almost feels like a cut chapter from the book itself.
Totally. Yes. It's great. And also, we have the background, not even from the miniseries, but from the book. He spent his whole life studying House Atreides, fascinated and obsessed. So it's also like, it makes sense that he would know the best solution for this situation. Right.
The best way to appeal to them.
It's just great. It's just like a really wonderful moment. Also, considering Farad'n basically didn't have lines until this episode.
I know. Yeah.
I was like, you've got a lot of catching up to do. And he fucking caught up. It was great.
He did it. I was sold on Farad'n as well by the end of this scene.
He started as the cutest child also. So yes. And then two more quick ones. Preacher Paul putting his hand on Gurney's when they're together on Arkeen. And Gurney's like, who are you? Like, just tell me that Paul is dead. Tell me that you're not Paul. And he's like, yeah, that person who I was is no longer, that sort of thing. And effectively requesting his final meal. Just let me be who I am, and I am hungry. Yeah. Was a really sweet little moment. And I thought really...
What do we think his final meal was? Oatmeal.
Oatmeal?
No?
Just banana cinnamon oatmeal?
Is that a boring final meal?
Yeah, it's a terrible final.
Okay, gotcha.
I mean, no judgment, dude, but you deserve better than that. Can you imagine your last day on Earth and you're like, what do I want?
Give me that Quaker Oats, baby.
Give me that antiquated man on a cannon shell of grain. Just, it's very strange.
I mean, okay, you got a lot of opinions here, Leo. What's your final meal?
Shotgun 3 beers. I don't know what you're talking about. It worked on Sabiha. I feel like it's gonna work on the Executioner. They're like, God damn, this dude's red as hell. All right, you're off the hook. Yeah, that was good. That was good what you did.
That's fair.
Fascinating choice. Yeah, probably oatmeal. No, you know what? Actually, Paul would probably have some pundi rice from Caladan. He would want that quality pundi rice from Caladan, a bit of that Caladanian wine, and then just simple, but reminds him of home, all before the Arrakis stuff. And then maybe one of Chani's, like the recipe Chani used for the morsels, the like leaf-wrapped morsels. I feel like that would be nice. And
yeah, I think you're correct. That's perfect.
Or oatmeal. or just oatmeal. I also wanted to shout out James McAvoy, again, his acting when Alia puts the knife to his chest in their final confrontation, and she's looks like ready to stab him through the heart with the Chris knife. Yeah. First of all, it implied that he was vulnerable, and I kind of love that because in the book, he's just at that point, he's immortal. He's like an immortal god, and he just throws people around, and he's so above it all. So having him have a moment where he's like, no, I trust my aunt to wrest control in these final moments. I mean, it's kind of the thing that helped awaken Duncan Idaho, right? That he could not move himself to kill an Atreidian person.
Yeah.
He could not do something in spite of that loyalty. So saying you are possessed by Baron Harkonnen, but at your heart of hearts, at your core, you are still an Atreides, and I know that this will help you, is just beautiful. It's like very wrapped in lore. It's very wrapped in these characters. Also, just the look on his face is heartbreaking because he's seeing everything that's happening to her. I thought it was incredible. And it's really brief, but we get a shot of him crying after she dies.
Yeah.
Also heart-wrenching. Beautiful stuff. So, in summary, to wrap up this sprawling, meandering mess of ideas, do I wish that John Harrison kept closer to the book because the book's fucking great and you don't really need to change that much? Yeah, 100, 200, 400%. But I also think that the above scenes, the ones I was just talking about, I think they did a really great job of demonstrating that he understood these specific characters well enough to create new moments with them that feel, like you said, like cut chapters or feel like alternative drafts that maybe Frank wrote before publishing the final.
Yeah. We've said that before as well. And I think that compliment to Harrison and the team still stands. Like, they know these characters inside and out. We've gushed about Irulan. We've gushed about Chani doing things differently in these miniseries, but doing things that perfectly make sense for who they are as characters and what their place in the story is. I think understanding that on a deep level is one of the greatest challenges of Dune, and also can be one of the most controversial things, because if you get that wrong and Duncan Idaho, for example, does something totally out of character, then you effectively ruin an iconic character. And knowing and understanding these characters and being able to write additional scenes in their voice is such a magic trick. And John Harrison was a wizard in being able to pull them off.
Yeah, he gave us an amount that respected Irulan and Chani. We got more of them. It was great. He also understood that Palin Basha is exactly the kind of guy to be trying to get laid and get instead knifed by a person. Incredible. He's like, does Palin Basha fuck? Almost.
Almost. Nearly.
That is the core of Palin Basha's character. So I'm glad that he also nailed that.
I will say, by my count, that is now 2 people who have died on screen mid sexual activity in this series. Yeah. And I'm wondering if Mr. Harrison has talked about this fear in therapy, because this seems like a deep-seated fear that he's trying to get out there. Yeah. And it's okay, buddy. No one's going to come get you while you're, you can fuck in peace.
Yeah. Just focus on having a connection with your partner, John.
Yeah.
All right. Stop saying death still in the midst of copulation. Leave it alone, dude. Gotta focus on your pleasure too sometimes, Anyway, our advice for John Harrison's sex life aside, what's your first pick for something you liked?
So I 100% agree with those moments you pointed out in your pick. So I want to start by saying I second that.
Sure.
The writing in the additional scenes is in the characters' voices in much of this series. And that's not something to be overlooked.
Right.
The thing that I went with then is and this may be controversial, I actually liked how Leto's transformation was toned down.
Oh, interesting. Sure.
In this miniseries, it was basically just him combining with the sand trout and them attaching to his arm. And we saw it sort of expand and grow over the course of the episode, getting up to his neck and starting to expand to his face and presumably across the rest of his body. But it was a very slow expansion.
Right.
And I think it benefited the visual medium. To be clear, I also want to say that parts of the transformation and how it was portrayed were utterly disastrous. We've already joked a couple of times about the worm roar.
Yeah.
That was bad. I don't want to be too mean about the special effects because it's a early 2000s TV show budget special effects, whatever. They did the best they could with those green screens, but woof, some of that like running through the desert was really cringy and
To
bad.
be fair, on par with the Flash CW series,
Really?
which is in the last like 3 years. It's
Oh, okay.
not good, don't get me wrong, but you're right. It's not good because it's like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me how bad it can still be trying to do that sort of effect. For some reason, people running fast, I can't think of a time I've seen it great.
Yeah, totally. You have to do that slow-mo that they do in X-Men, you know?
Yeah, like Quicksilver running.
Like Quicksilver
sequence.
slow-mo. That's the only way to really portray it well, I think. All of that aside, I think this transformation translated better to the screen rather than the very dramatic and frankly very gross transformation that is described in the book.
Yeah.
We've discussed in the past how some of the weirder parts, quote unquote, weirder parts of Frank's story are probably best toned down just to make them a little more palatable for the average audience.
Mm-hmm.
Alia comes to mind, right? 2-year-old Alia speaking in full sentences, throwing out philosophy. A bit of cognitive dissonance there that I think becomes so weird that it's distracting, takes away from the story. So maybe you age her up.
Right.
I think this is another example of where if it's so weird and if he becomes a wormy boy too fast,
Yeah.
it becomes more distracting and you just like can't think about anything but how weird it is that this worm man is talking.
Yeah.
And so I think the transformation helped make that a bit more palatable to someone who's doesn't know about Dune, is new to this universe, or just would be off-put by the weirdness of it. I think there's another practical benefit to it, and that's just the fact that James McAvoy is a great actor, and you don't want to cover most of his face and body with like a worm suit or a worm CGI.
Yeah.
Having the transformation just be on his arm and seeing it expand allows for his face to still be very visible, allows for him to still have his human form and walk around and do the blocking in the scenes and do the physical acting and the facial acting that makes him such a stellar on-screen presence.
Right.
And I think that's hard to do. That's the Mandalorian problem, right? It's like, how much can you cover the face of your fucking lead character and your lead actor that you probably paid too much money for?
Yeah.
So I think there's just sort of like a practical on-screen filmmaking benefit as well to sort of toning down the transformation. Because again, to be clear, for those of you that have forgotten the book, like the worms cover his whole body.
Yeah.
And he can pull them up over his nose in like a still suit nose fashion. So they act like a still suit for him. It's weird. And it's described as this like creepy, we chattered about it in our book club.
Living leather
skin that's like squirmy and moves. And in our book club, we chattered about how it feels like a Venom situation, like a Venom symbiote situation all over his body. So I think it would be a tough tightrope to walk.
Yeah.
How weird do we get before it's distracting? And I think the miniseries made a choice here, and I personally was a fan of the choice.
I will also say I had an initial very viscerally negative response to it because obviously the worms look terrible. The little like the sand trout that come out of it looks awful. It's like so. I think if you gave me an hour to do it, that's about how bad it would look. So I was really confused. I'm like, these are professionals. How did this happen? And then after this whole thing and his like, oh, I'm changing. And then he looks down and it's like the size of a quarter on his hand. And I was like, the fuck is this? Give me my worm boy. What are you doing? But, and this is to the point that I think this is a good choice. Not only did they quickly show that he could just stand in a sandstorm, so even the unchanged skin is changed, which is good. I'm like, it's not just he's got an immune part of his hand. Just make sure you block the knife with that little spot, or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's that. The other thing is how quickly it grows across the episode, because by the end, it's like most of his right arm and his neck and his shoulders, and it is so much more. I get the impression that, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, it will be fully encasing him. And you're right. They get all of the benefits of having the actor be basically unencumbered. They are able to do it as a practical thing where they just have this makeup effect on him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also, by showing it growing so quickly, we still get this is this huge dramatic transformation that's going to happen.
Yeah, totally. I mean, his vocal cords clearly changed.
Worm roar! I'm a worm! What's up, everybody?
All right. What about item number 2 for your picks for the things that you liked?
Yeah. Okay. The second thing I chose was another small selection of things because
On brand.
there aren't rules. We make this podcast.
Totally.
So I said this is little lore tidbits that they got right, in spite, again, of the wild changes. And basically, for as many issues as we're going to get into a little later, I think that there were little moments of lore that I really appreciated and wanted to take a moment to celebrate. Because again, John Harrison, for all of his weird choices in this third act, clearly does understand the characters and understands the universe better than I would ever hope. Really, genuinely impresses me how well he knows everything. So let's get through some of these. I have 3. The first one is the explanation of weirding combat and weirding movement. And in case it's been a minute since you've seen the episode, we see Farad'n in a training sequence with Jessica, and she goes, and now she does a weirding move, and it's that kind of blurring, cool effect, and he can't do it. And he kind of explains why it's hard for him. He's like, I'm trying to do it the way you told me. I'm visualizing myself in the new position, but it's not happening. And she's like, it's fine. It'll take time, blah, blah, blah. But even just his little moment, his little explanation there, I thought was one of the most beautiful explanations of weirding combat. I think it's even better than it was ever said in the book, because the idea, right, that the Bene Gesserit can visualize themselves at position B, and they get there faster than they could normally have moved that distance, in combination with their intense ability to see their enemies and analyze and process information. Anyway, it was very cool. A very good explanation, which was great. I also loved with Farad'n, I can't remember the exact line. I should have written it down. But he says, I'm going to be the author of my own story, or I'm going to take control over my own narrative kind of thing.
That stood out to me as well.
His use of the word author was really fun because we didn't get his rebranding in this miniseries as Hark al-Ada, the kind of historian scribe for the God Emperor Leto Atreides. So there's having lost that in the miniseries, it was nice for him to say, oh, I'm going to be the author of my thing. Tip of the hat to the fact that he basically does become the official author for his cousin Leto II Atreides.
Yeah. So
I was happy with that little moment because it kind of eased the burn of not getting the other thing, which I thought to be a very cool plot twist. We talked about that in the book club. Frank did it again,
Right.
It was another Carino this whole time. Very
and
cool.
I think that line was very intentional.
Yeah.
There is a million different ways of saying that line more economically.
Yeah.
I'll take control of my own fate, Jessica.
Right.
I'm in charge of my own destiny, Jessica. But to use the word author there, I will be the author of my own destiny, feels very intentional and on purpose. And again, knowing that John Harrison understands the story so well, it doesn't seem far-fetched that he chose that word.
Totally.
For a reason.
Yeah, it's better than his rough draft, which was, Mother, I'm tired of you controlling me. I'm going to, as if a new person, a new renamed person, be the scribe, the official imperial scribe of my own destiny from now and forever. And although I will never be married, I will be with someone who there may be love eventually. And Sissy's like, what the fuck? Yeah.
The editor was like, John,
can we just talk about that one line? And he's like, the worm roar?
A little on the nose. Can I provide you some feedback? Are you open to some feedback?
No. He's gonna worm roar a second time. Every time John, you try to fucking bring me feedback, I'm gonna add a worm roar.
Oh boy. Yeah, I bet he held that over the writer's room.
It's true. The final thing that I wanted to celebrate is the Sons of Esmar Tuick. And this is upon rejoining the smugglers, Gurney Halleck meets with a man and he's sort of sussing him out. Do I trust you? Can I trust you? This is right before Gurney joins up with Paul and Leto. And
Right.
the smuggler says, before they clasp forearms very impressively, he says, "We are the sons of Esmar Tuick." And considering I loved Esmar Tuick as a character in the book, I know that in Dune he dies like
Yeah.
a quarter of the way through the book. The idea of these like rogues, these smugglers, these bandits, these criminals, really imperial criminals, but who have like a moral compass and a code of ethics and honor, and they are the sorts of people that would sit at a table with Leto Atreides and work with Dr. Kynes. And like, I just really liked Esmar Tuick as an idea, as like an archetype. So the fact that he has become, we are the sons of Esmar Tuick, is really cool. And there were references in Children of Dune to the Tuicks, like there's Sietch Tuick, named after the line of Tuicks. But we didn't get that, and instead we got this. And either way, I'm just happy whenever a Tuick is mentioned.
Yeah.
They're cool.
And it's such a deep cut.
Yep.
Like in the book, I feel like Tuick maybe comes up a little bit more. It's still a deep cut in the book too, all things considered. But I think in this TV show, especially in a miniseries that came years after you may or may not have remembered some guy named Tuick at the banquet.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's like the deepest of cuts, you know? Like if there was YouTube around the time this series came out, this would be in one of those like 10 Easter eggs you didn't notice.
The rock stars, new rock stars is like, hey guys, welcome back. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so I love me a deep cut like that too, you know? It's for like the 12 people who will notice. And like that's, first of all, it's nice being one of the 12, you know? You're like, yes, you know?
Yeah.
And then whenever a TV show does something like that, where it's like, this is small, it's not a distraction, but it is for the 12 people who will get it.
Yeah.
Love that shit.
I will also say it's the sort of thing that Gurney Halleck would understand, and it would also demonstrate very quickly to Gurney Halleck the kind of men he's dealing with. So it's like, you're right. It's a deep cut, and it also is one that makes oodles of sense from a lore perspective and from a character perspective of Gurney being like, okay, bet you're on the level. That's great.
Right.
So very cool. And that's my second thing. So kind of some attention to detail. I hope we get some mentions of, well, no, we didn't even get Tuick in the first one from Villeneuve, but it's fine. What about you? What's your second pick for something you liked from this episode?
So my second pick is fairly small because there's basically only one scene of this in the miniseries, but I appreciated that scene regardless. We get a shot of these ornithopters doing like a raiding attack on some random siege or some random community in the desert. And for me, that was important to show because throughout Children of Dune, through the whole book, there is plenty of unrest within the Empire, but particularly in Arrakeen. And by the end, by the time you're in the last couple of chapters, things are literally on the brink of civil war. Like that spark could light any day now. And there are raids happening in the desert. Leto at this point in the book is this like devil of the desert or whatever they're calling him, like out there fucking breaking stuff. It's chaos. It's havoc. And like Alia's world is falling apart as her mind is also falling apart, you know?
Right.
And in the book, we've spent so much time focusing on the characters, on Alia, on Leto, on Jessica, on Farad, and that some of that like big picture politics fades into the background. And the focus becomes so much about Leto's transformation, about prescience, about the future, about this, about that, about characters doing things. And we sort of lose focus on the big picture politics of it all. And I liked that in this miniseries, we got some more sense of that. A sense that Alia's political world is also falling apart. That there is a civil war happening, that there are rebel Fremen that are wreaking havoc out in the desert, here in Arrakeen, and that there's engagements, like actual battles taking place between the rebels and the Atreides soldiers, or the Fremen that are loyal to the Atreides. A lot of that happens entirely off page and is just referenced in a couple of throwaway lines in the book. Here, it's an actual scene. In the book, we didn't get like a chapter where we saw a raid happen or whatever. It wasn't front and center. And Frank is never really interested in that sort of thing anyway. He
Right.
doesn't write like action scenes and whatever. But in a miniseries like this, I think it's important to do some of that world building that for Frank is off page. I think in a miniseries like this, to get it on screen and to have it front and center and to feel that civil war brewing adds a sense of urgency to all of the events taking place and adds a sense of stakes to the choices that the characters are making too. So that's another thing I liked about the miniseries, is that the unrest, the impending civil war, and the conflicts taking place outside of our characters, we got to see a bit of that.
Yeah, because in the book, it's pretty much only the Cone Teen moment with the troubadour that we get a sense of like the very real and active perception of Alia as this like terrible thing among some Fremen. And so to see the like, oh yeah, we found this priest of yours killed and carved up with a message to you from Fremen.
Yeah.
It's like, Jesus Lord. They really did decide to put that more front and center in a way that was effective as a visual storytelling medium. Well, we've showered this masterpiece with praise. Nothing wrong with it, right? You might think this far into the episode. We've got some news for you. We also had problems with it. We are going to talk about those problems that we had with this final episode in the miniseries after a short break. So stick around. When we're coming back hot. We're coming back with criticisms and complaints. Voices will elevate in volume almost as loud as a worm roar, registered trademark. Roar. So stick around. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back, folks. Let's now turn the tables a little bit. We have showered this episode with praise. It's time to do some critiquing because there are things to critique.
Yeah, there are. Let's talk about two things that we did not like about this series.
And I'll start it off for us this time.
Sure. Yeah, set the tone.
Here we go. My first pick definitely sets the tone.
Yeah, what is it?
For the things we're going to talk about.
What's your single pick?
I wrote down basically everything about the third act. That's what I wrote down in bold in our script that I disliked about this series. And it's true. I stand by that. Like, I actually went back and rewatched and looked at the time code because I was like, when did this series basically fall off for me? Like, when in the episode was I totally checked out? Because I was just like, this is off the fucking wagon at this point. And it's the last 30 minutes. I was still in the wagon for most of the episode. And then basically after Faradin's truly iconic betrayal of his mother, which I did genuinely love, the last 30 minutes of the episode are like, I don't even want to hold back, are just like so utterly bad that I completely like did a 180 on this episode where I was just like, nope, like the bad creative choices, things are wrong here. And the thing that stood out to me, particularly in the last 30 minutes, is just how sort of choppy, rushed, and weird it felt.
Right.
Like it almost felt like they had an ending in mind and the ending was different from the book, whatever. They made some creative choices, but they maybe had a cohesive ending.
Sure.
And then maybe it like wildly got cut down in the editing room or something. Like there are points in the last 30 minutes where it feels like a scene stops in the middle. Like there should have been more scene happening.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. And we joked about it earlier, but the Stilgar attack is one of those moments.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, you had to have filmed something else for this, right? Because like what is in the final product is not a whole arc of a story. You're setting something up, but there's no payoff.
Right.
So it feels like there was an ending written. Maybe it was too much. Maybe it went over budget. Maybe there had to be dramatic cuts. Maybe it was all shot. And in the editing room, someone decided it had to be trimmed down and it got trimmed down too much. I don't know, but it certainly felt that way.
Right.
And I will say, I have been vocal in the past about my opinion that Frank himself is not the shining example of landing the plane of your book properly and getting the final act of it nailed 100%. in a way that's perfectly satisfying and closes all the loops. I have criticized Frank's writing before for feeling rushed and clunky, particularly in the end of his books in those last few chapters.
Yeah.
And Children of Dune, the book, is no different. Like the final chapters, there's like multiple time skips that happen in quick succession. There are important events that just happen entirely off page that we learn about like in a throwaway line in hindsight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it certainly feels a little rushed and clunky. That's almost like a Frank staple.
Yeah.
Dune Messiah was that way. Dune is that way. His other novels are that way too. So I think, to be fair to the miniseries, any adaptation that tries to take on the monumental task of adapting this book will have to make changes to the third act for it to make sense on screen. I think that is absolutely necessary, because the way it is written is done in a way that only works, in my opinion, on the page and in a chapter format. It doesn't work in a cohesive.
You say it works, but a lot of people have that complaint where they're like, wow, that was rushed. That ending was rushed. And it's like, yeah, it's a great book, but yeah, the ending was kind of rushed. So
yeah, totally. So I think it's not the creative decisions I have a problem with, because I think you have to do that when you're trying to land the ship of Frank's incredible stories. It's just not like this. It shouldn't have been like this.
Not like this.
And there are many complaints that I have, but instead of sort of getting into it and ranting on, here's just like a quick shotgun blast of just some of the more egregious decisions that stood out to me in these last 30 minutes. One, Paul being murdered by Maurice makes literal zero fucking sense why that would happen.
Yeah.
Maurice yelling Jacques is one thing, sure.
Jacques
That in and of itself is stupid. But Maurice wouldn't kill Paul. At this point in the story,
no.
All of the cast out are religiously behind the God Emperor.
Right.
They have submitted to him. They wouldn't be killing someone who's under his protection and is his literal father. It makes no sense. And honestly, why not just have Alia's guards kill Paul? And that, why make that change?
Yeah.
That's item number one. Item number two is the worm roar. We've said our piece about that.
Worm roar! Yeah.
We've made enough jokes about it. It's bad. It's cheesy. It's cheesy in a way that doesn't even feel like, oh, haha, nostalgic, cheesy, early 2000s sci-fi trope. It's just like a bad decision. Shouldn't have had that happen. Item number three that I didn't like is by the end of the episode, I was like, you could have cut all of Gurney's scenes and this could have been 20 minutes shorter and we would have lost basically nothing. Because Gurney did nothing this whole show because we cut the whole Jessica, Bene Gesserit, Gurney drugging Leto plotline.
Right.
Item number four, the final showdown with Alia, the wedding scene. There were moments in it that were good, and I agree with a lot of what you said earlier in our discussion. But in general, the roar, the way that it went down, Alia stabbing herself rather than jumping out the window, like Jessica, I had like just problems with so much of the like tiny portrayals of the characters. And I think that's one scene where you kind of just have to stick to the book as much as you can. You can maybe get rid of the Leto swinging his aunt around in a circle in like a Bugs Bunny cartoon fashion. Sure, get rid of that. That's weird. But this confrontation was dramatically changed, and I didn't like a lot of the changes. And the final thing I'll say here is that I didn't like that Leto was sort of minimized in this whole thing. Yeah. Like he was our protagonist, and we don't learn by the end of the episode that he is ascending the throne, that he's going to live for 4,000 years, that he has activated the golden path and we're all on it now. This is Leto's world. We're all just living in it. And more importantly than even all of those like logistical things, I think the emotional part of Leto losing his humanity and starting to become disconnected with the people around him because of his abilities in almost like a Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen sort of way, that's not here at all. If anything, he's like more emotional and more connected, perhaps too connected with his sister. Like it just, I was sad to see that Leto's journey was sort of simplified to just the hero that shows up at the end with superpowers and saves the day.
Right.
Rather than the grand sacrifice that we know from the books he is making. That was missing from most of this episode, but particularly the end where they could have wrapped up that thread.
Right.
So that's just a quick laundry list of issues. A lot of them are in the final 30 minutes of this episode. It really lost me. It really lost me there at the end. I think creative decisions are fine and well, and John Harrison has proven that he understands this world, understands these characters, and can expand on them in a way that makes sense. Here, it didn't make sense. I think many of these decisions fundamentally changed or omitted major themes in the book that are critical to Frank's story, and they just missed the mark in translating Frank's original intentions here, I think, at the end of the story.
Yeah.
So that's my mini rant. I could say much more about it, and we have other things to say about it, but that's my first pick, is that in general, the final act of this episode, around the last 30 minutes, totally and utterly lost me and took me out of it too much to enjoy it. I will now hand off the mic to you. What was your first pick for the things you disliked about this episode?
I'll say that my first pick is basically, the abandonment of the final act of the book. Like, it kind of along the same lines as what you're talking about, this continued departure from the original text in ways that doesn't make sense for characters or makes characters worse or plot beats weaker. And totally agreed on all the points you brought up. And I think also, like, we were both kind of holding out to see if certain possibly concerning trends were going to like get wrapped up or addressed by the end, and some of them weren't, which is a tough look, because then it's like, oh wow, so now if I go back and watch that first episode, like Jessica in this miniseries, I can now say, is just like the kindly grandmother who's like visiting because her son got black contact lenses and then wandered out into the desert and is now
roaring everywhere.
He keeps roaring. That's her grandson's roaring everywhere. Yeah, it's very like, she's just such a weak character in this miniseries.
Yeah,
because she is like Bene Gesserit, and she teaches for Rodden, and she has some of the like moments in the show that she had in the book. But this question of whether or not she returned to the Bene Gesserit, the question of like her drugging her grandson to potentially death for the sake of proving herself loyal to the Bene Gesserit, the fact that the Bene Gesserit were going to have her killed, all of that stuff is so saucy and completely missing. And it makes her way less cunning and intelligent and planning and manipulative and way less relevant. Like, kind of the same thing where if we took all of Gurney's scenes out of the miniseries, wouldn't really change anything.
Right.
Kind of same for her, because Rodden's there. Like, I guess that, but it just didn't really seem to matter, any of it. Because really in the book, a big part of her involvement is what's happening to Leto through Gurney. And with that gone, it's like, okay, what is Jessica doing other than being flown from point A to point B by people and then being like, hey, do stuff here for a bit. It's like, okay, sure. So that's one thing. Leto going to Arcane and being like, Father, you have to come with me. And you can't go out into the desert and die a Fremen's death. You're going to come to the city and you're going to die, is what's necessary. And we both know it. And Paul being like, okay, sure. That's the book. And I liked that. I thought there was some real weight to the decision. And also for him to be like, we're going to leave Gurney because I want Gurney to live.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking and beautiful and sweet. Again, what was Gurney doing in Arcane? Other than like being a sounding board for the preacher, for them to talk for a little. But even then, you could have had that fucking moment in the scene that they were all together.
Right, back in the siege. Like,
combine scenes, John. You already know how to combine scenes. Just do it again.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was very strange. And
I agree.
Again, when you make the decision to put Gurney in Arcane at the day of everything, it's like, why? What does this do?
Yeah, we've talked about it before, but Leto's prescience in this episode is basically just like non-existent.
Totally true.
You know? And the miniseries in general like really treats Paul and Leto's powers as just like sort of superhero bonuses that they get, and not really it doesn't really examine them in the way the book does, and that's like a huge core theme that's missing. And I think this Gurney point makes it very clear. Like Leto knows step by step exactly what's going to go down in Arrakeen.
Right.
And he wants Gurney to survive because of a personal love for this man.
Not to mention, then he fucking roars when his dad dies. And it's like, does that make sense? Father, son? Yes. Does it make sense? Leto, the second Atreides, who can see all of fucking space and time?
Yeah.
And even if he's not looking forward and present, he's seen the golden path. He knows his father. He knows his dad dies. Like, it's so, you're right. It's,
yeah. I mean, don't even get me started about that teleportation thing.
Just swoop, I'm here now. Again, it's very like the CW Flash. And there are great, if you haven't seen this, by the way, Abu, if you haven't seen the compilation of like awful CW Flash VFX, it's shocking. It's like genuinely upsetting what they managed to create. And like a team of people were like, yeah, this is good. And they hit send. Very strange.
Wow.
Anyway, so yes, the teleportation, that was weird. And really the last thing that I had in this little section, my other pick's also kind of a list of things, but to wrap up this first small list of things, and it's small because I do like the Farad'n Winsisia confrontation in the miniseries. I really do like it. But there was something about Jessica being like, okay, then banish your mother, and him being like, done, bye Winsisia. It said so much about Farad'n as a character. It said so much about the power dynamics of the House Carino team. And the fact that Tykanik, who was very mixed feelings about Winsisia, was like, yeah, that's cool. I'm fine with that.
Right.
All of that I thought was really interesting and poignant and well written and nuanced and had great depth to it. Happening now, like happening on Arrakis and the guards dragging them away and Tykanik going to like defend her. That whole little scene played out a little bit more generically than I think the book does.
Mm-hmm.
And also Farad'n has kind of implicit protection here. Like I would say confidently that the only person in this scene that could actually kill Farad'n is Ghanima. Politically, power-wise, it would be someone from House Atreides doing that. No one is going to kill Farad'n Carino and this moment. No one's going to do that. So him saying, get out, mother, I'm actually on my own, with that sort of implicit protection, just is not as strong, I think. If he was in House Carino on Solstice Secundus and he goes, actually, mother, I'm taking control over everything. I'm taking control. This is my house. It's my time. There is a universe in which she's like, yeah, sure. And then has him killed and like adopts Fade Ralpha. It's like, you're my child now. I don't know. I thought that was weaker. They kind of foreshadowed it, but it's such a wild moment in the book that I think just was missing from this adaptation.
I forgot that was actually a condition of Jessica's in the book.
Yeah.
I'm glad you pointed that out. Like that's another thing that wasn't here, is that Jessica played a role in Farad'n's turn.
He is Bene Gesserit.
Yeah. That's missing from the show too.
Yeah. Well, that was my first pick. What's your second pick for something that you didn't super love?
Okay, well, my second pick we've been joking about all episode, but it needs to be said out loud.
Sure.
The incest vibes can no longer be ignored.
Yep. Yeah.
Like they were there in the previous episode between siblings.
Sure.
But we were like, yeah, they're twins, they're connected, they're preborn Kwisatz Haderach, they're finishing each other's sentences. Sure, they're just really close siblings, plus their shared experience.
Right.
We get it. We're just showing how close they are. We have crossed a line in this episode.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'll expand this to say I didn't end up liking the Leto-Ghanima relationship at all in this episode.
Yeah.
I think it was handled well, actually, in the last one, in episode 2. Here in 3, we start with the Laza Tiger situation, which makes utterly no sense to me because we get rid of the Ghanima self-hypnosis, right? Because it's not part of their plan.
Yeah.
She wasn't in on the plan. All she does here is walk out and see a dead Laza Tiger.
Yeah. One.
Where's the other?
Where's the other fucking tiger? Did they forget? They didn't have the CG budget for a second tiger.
Right. maybe it's 2 carcasses. I don't know. It's kind of off screen. Regardless, she sees this dead Laza tiger, stabs it a couple of times, and then just assumes Leto must be dead.
It's like he's dead and gone forever.
And just heads back to Siege Tabur.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where is Leto's body? I don't see any blood anywhere.
Right.
Is there a shred of his cloak somewhere? Did he drop his knife? Nothing. Literally nothing in that scene. What we see on camera, maybe there's an implication or whatever, but nothing that I saw on camera in my 2 watches of this episode said to me that Leto Atreides was killed by this fucking Laza tiger.
She hands a scrap to Stilgar later, but
yes,
or he has it, and they're like, "Oh, he's dead."
Scrap.
But I don't think they showed that in that scene, right?
No. Yes, I think that's the one thing is like he smells it too, which is extra weird. But
he's like, "Yeah, it smells like James McAvoy to me.
Smells like my boy.
Smells like my boy.
I raised that boy.
I could have killed him any night. I stood over him with my knife." That's how the book starts.
That's true. Yeah, you're correct. To be fair, there's the cloak sniffing scene. And presumably that is Leto's cloak that she recovers from the Laza tiger. But in that scene itself, there's nothing there that proves to anyone, least of all Ganima, that her brother is dead.
Right.
And it's just tough to believe. Just stick with the hypnosis thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. The hypnosis thing is it's not one of those weird Frank things that it's so weird that it's unbelievable. It's believable to me.
Yeah.
Or even just like go with some sort of trauma response or something.
We haven't even introduced truthsayers, so there isn't a problem to solve. She could just lie.
That's true.
I mean, because you're right. The self-hypnosis, I could see that being hard to like show for everything that it is. But the self-hypnosis was only necessary because they knew that Alia would have her questioned by truthsayers to say, "Do you know he's dead?" And her saying, "Yes, I saw the body," only works if she believes that is true.
Right. She'd have to pass the polygraph and believe it.
Exactly. So that is the reason that it was important for her to do that and unbury that technique from thousands of lives ago. But in this, we don't have truthsayers. We don't that's just not a thing. So she could just lie. Like after he kills the 2 Laza tigers, he could be like, "All right, I'm going to go ahead to Jakaruru. You're a little banged up. You should go back and get medical help. Tell everyone I'm dead. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be really sad. Tell everyone I'm dead." Why cut her out of that decision? It doesn't make sense.
Make the plan with her and just be like, "Go lie for me." Yeah. That's so true.
We are lovers after all.
We are lovers after all. Jesus. That's such a great point, Leah. Like, there is no problem to solve in this miniseries. Right. Yeah, why did he lie at all?
Am I making you angry about this a third time?
Yeah. Now I'm like, yeah, there's another layer of anger you've uncovered now.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. So true.
That's what
like
we do here.
If we're gonna get rid of the hypnosis, if we're gonna simplify it, then like really simplify it.
Yeah.
And show me a 30-second scene of Leto and Ganima being like, "Okay, here's the plan then. Tigers are dead. I'm gonna go on to Jakaru. You need to pretend to fake my death. Deal? Deal.
Yeah.
Let's kiss." Like whatever.
Yeah. That's how you make a deal real. Otherwise you're just saying words.
Right.
The smooch is what
on the lips.
On the lips.
All right. Well, let's talk about the damn kiss.
Sure.
Part 2 of my anger over the Leto Ganima relationship, of course, is the weird incest vibes that are just like so on screen during all of this. And in particular are basically undeniable as far as I'm concerned in their reunion, the day of her wedding, when she's in the wedding dress. There's just way too much kissing and touching and hand-holding going on in that scene to read as anything but romantic.
Right.
I don't care how close you are to your siblings, you are not doing that with a sibling.
Sure.
And my first reaction was, okay, this is the show's weird way of implying that they're actually going to get married in this like political arrangement, as they do in the book. Leto's bringing back the, quote unquote Pharaonic Empire.
Right.
But it's made very clear in the book that they never consummate that marriage because Leto is worm boy by then, and that neither of them
and they wouldn't
want to.
Yeah, exactly. Like he can't.
In fact, they're like disgusted by that idea.
Yeah, they're like, it's so absurd for them. I mean, we expected them to suggest that. It's not surprising, but yeah, no, it's gross. We wouldn't do that.
Right. So it doesn't even really make sense as like a I don't know, some sort of reference to their eventual marriage to each other. Because in the show, like, are we assuming they fuck? Like, I don't know. Like, it's very weird and uncomfortable, and I think the wrong way to go about this.
Sure.
And nobody's a fan of incest. Like, Game of Thrones maybe is the only thing that ever handled that correctly.
Sure.
And even that was like very whatever. I'm not going to get into that. I don't need Game of Thrones emails in the inbox. So, in summary, not a fan of the Leto Ganima relationship in this episode.
Sure.
I liked it much better in the last episode. There's some restraint there. Here, it gets weird. It gets unnecessary. And if you are going to go down this route, then explore it and justify it further in the story. It's never explored as part of their character or part of their relationship in this, and it's never explained why any of this matters. We don't even see them get married at the end or anything like that. It's just all implied in that final Ganima standing on an outcropping talking scene. And this is another factor where I just feel like it's rushed. Like there's maybe another scene written that was never shot or something that explains some of this.
Yeah.
And it feels like an editing room or a budget decision where they're just like, okay, fine, just like cut it. Like let's end it. And I think even the ending, by extension, like doesn't make sense to anyone who hasn't read the book. You would get to that ending as a fresh like viewer of this miniseries with no context of Dune and be like, what happened?
Yeah. When she's like, you will be known as like consort.
Yeah.
And it's like, why?
Why can't they just get married still? Why? I think as a viewer, it makes no sense unless you know the book, in which case I hope you're as mad as me about it.
I will say, okay, I really tried to be like, okay, this is me being uncomfortable with this because of like being an American and like physical touch and proximity and that these things with siblings is just not something that I ever experienced. And so I see it as weird and uncomfortable. And I think it's still very true. And I think that it really is just the kiss on the mouth. Twice. Takes it just over that point of like, obviously we don't see them bang on screen. And like that would be a further line crossed in the sand. We can all agree.
That would be a crossing of the Rubicon, you know. There's no going back after that.
So, I don't know. It is tough because I was also uncomfortable with it, but I don't know where that balance is of like what is making me uncomfortable. And then I try to ask myself, if they didn't kiss on the mouth. Okay, I imagine the director saying, you are twins and you are of one mind. You are one character. And so the normal physical rules of like, this is my brother, this is my... No, this is an extension of who I am. You would maybe be more physical and touching and holding hands and being close. It's the kiss on the mouth that I think is tough because this is also, by the way, everything I'm saying ignores the storytelling language of TV and cinema and movies, where if you show me those two actors acting that way and don't give me any other scenes, I'm like, yeah, they're lovers. They're clearly...
Right. I mean, there's a very explicit shot where it hangs on the mirror.
Yeah.
Where the two of them are like holding each other.
Aren't we so beautiful together?
Like hip to hip, you know, like pelvises are touching.
Yeah.
And it like hangs on that shot for an uncomfortably long.
Yeah.
And she's in a wedding dress. Like, I don't know that there's a visual storytelling layer here that you just have to read into and be like, I don't know what else you're trying to say here with this shot. This like woman in a bridal dress. And
someone on set needed to be like, guys, what if people think that this is too, like, are we going to address this? And then they didn't choose to address it. And she didn't say, you know, I'll be marrying my brother. We're not going to do anything ever. We don't like each other in that way. But for these reasons, it would take 5 seconds. You could take that uncomfortable long mirror scene out, and now you've got enough time for her to explain at the end what's going to happen and why Faradin's not going to be her husband.
Yeah.
Or make him her husband. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Nothing.
But John Harrison threatened to add another roar in, you know.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
You know, they were like, oh, okay, back off. I'm backing off.
Stop bringing these things up to him. Yeah. So, I don't know. It didn't as viscerally bother me. I was uncomfortable, but I think it was at a point where it was excusable until it very clearly wasn't.
Yeah, for sure.
That's tough.
All right. let's wrap up our dislike section of the conversation today. What's your final item that you disliked?
My final item kind of goes back to the thing I was saying about Jessica. Now that the miniseries is done, Duncan, Idaho, Tykanik, and Stilgar are bad. They're bad characters. They are bad changes, bad choices were made about them. And I want to take a minute to be angry about each of them in turn.
Let's do it. Love it.
So, I hated the way that these characters were handled. I was hoping for redemptions. I was hoping for Tykanik to get more time and more character. I was hoping for Duncan to stop being like a whimpering, weird computer man. And Stilgar is a bureaucrat who's like, we will find the worms. And whatever. There was that one line. I can't remember.
Right.
Oh, send men to summon worms.
The worms. Oh my gosh.
And I was like, what is this? What are you doing? Are they main characters? No, not remotely. Could you consolidate? Could you change? Yeah, totally. Does it ruin the story for them to be these weaker elements? No. I still broadly love the trilogy. I still really love this miniseries.
Yeah.
But there's a whole dimension to the cast that's utterly missing, and I don't know why. They made choices and changes that they didn't need to make. So let's talk about Duncan. Duncan first. Relegating Duncan to the like role of jealous, cuckold husband makes his whole character weaker, and also even his most heart-wrenching scenes I felt were mishandled. Like it felt very soap opera, very like drama on television, and didn't feel like this man whose wife, the love of his life, is evaporating into this evil possession and the horror. Like I read the book and cried at moments of Duncan talking about Alia being gone, and moments of just literal like, oh, is this a horror book now? Because I'm so sympathetic to Duncan's situation that I feel all of these feelings. And now you have a real human man, an actor guy whose job it is to use the words you gave him to make me feel feelings, and I don't feel anything. And that's insane. You've got the benefit of music and motion and I don't have to imagine the scene, and you're dropping the ball in a way that's like really tough.
Yeah. His scenes with Alia, I agree, were a fraction as emotional as they were in the book.
Yeah.
I think also his death scene with Stilgar was not as like epic as it was in the book.
Not remotely.
I was like, oh, here we go. Duncan's about to dunk on Stilgar.
Yeah. The three insults,
the three insults. Oh, I was so ready for that.
Yeah.
And even his death scene, his heart-wrenching line of 2 deaths for the Atreides for no better reason than the second for no better reason than the first. Like, fuck, that hits so hard in the book.
Yeah.
And here, like, I almost kind of laughed because it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree more. I think Duncan was mishandled in this series and oversimplified into just this like jealous, cuckold husband.
Yeah. Also, killing Javid, right? Glorious. Glad it happened. But in the book, it's shocking when he like turns and just buries his knife into Javid's chest, and he's like, all right, what are you going to do? And then for Stilgar to go through that whole kills him, and then it's like, oh, fuck, we have to go. We have to go now.
Yeah, there's like a panic.
There's like we have to get the fuck out of here. Who's with me? And then people go with him. That urgency, that would make such a good scene. It's already so cinematic. You almost feel the timing of the scene. Just do that scene. It doesn't make it better to make it the way it was. So, yeah, frustrating. And I think that scene with Javid is a great point.
Yeah.
I also wanted to point out, like, the whole thing in Messiah, what happened to him after he died and was brought back as a Gola, I feel like should, ideally, evoke real apprehension and maybe even fear over the Tleilaxu and what their technology provides as like a thing. And it also should deepen the mysteries of the Dune universe. Like when this man comes back and he's a dead clone with robot eyes, and he's also a Zensuni philosopher, it's like, whoa, shit, this universe is huge. There's all this cool stuff that's out there, even if it's not immediately important. Like the word games, the Zensuni philosophy, it's just fun, cool world building that we just completely abandoned. And now he's like computer man processing data. And it's like, okay, I guess when Sissia is like, you've been quiet, Mentat. And he's like, a Mentat must be careful with observation. It's like, also, even him returning to Duncan, he was never quite the same, right? Like, he was never the brash, drunk on spice beer swordmaster that he was in his living life. He is more eloquent and thoughtful, and he has these like great, I don't know, he's such an interesting character. So the fact that he's just this like Mentat or back to exactly what he was before he died, I think is like such a dropped ball. John Harrison decided that Duncan would either be a stiff robot or a normal dude, and neither of them are as compelling or interesting or exciting as the character in the book.
I agree totally.
Tychonic.
Oh boy.
In the book, he's sassy, skeptical. He's like, ugh, Winsissia, sure. And when it's like, oh, she's exiled, he's like, all right, cool. Change of manager? Great. I don't care. Whatever. Also, she keeps killing my men. Like, he's such a great character in the book. I liked him. And in this, he's a generic goon. He's just and then our plans will work. And she's like, yes. And he's like, good. I like the moment where he's interacting with the owl and gets like scared by it. Yeah. Amazing. That's like the only good moment of Tychonic in this entire fucking series. And I also want to point out that like when Sissia and Farad'n kind of define each other as polar elements within the Carino household, Tychonic is the Z dimension. Tychonic is the one who is like Sardaukar first, member of House Carino second, kind of. Yeah. And I think that the fact that her right-hand man is skeptical of her and cautious, thinking to himself, man, I better not let her try to seduce me. This woman's fucking crazy. Yeah. That adds such a depth to her character that is then just missing in this, which is really frustrating. And finally, Stilgar. Stilgar is awful. It's just awful changes. He is such a wonderful character. It's a damn shame. Javier Bardem. Period. It's a damn shame. Still, sometimes I just need to say his name to clear the palate of whatever the fuck this was, because like I struggle, as always, I struggle to isolate like writer, director versus like casting choices, right? And I complained a little bit like I would not cast this man as Stilgar because Stilgar should still be the most capable fighter in Siege Number. Because he's still a Fremen.
He should be 65 with the fucking 8-pack.
Yeah. Yes.
I should be afraid of this man.
Yeah. Even if he's like a live desert survivor, like still, I should look at him and be like, he could solo anyone in this room. Like he could take on anybody in this room without doubt. And even him pushing papers was always the big intimidating guy, or he can take anyone in the room, but he's wearing like fun clerk's glasses and he's going, I have this report for you. And it was always supposed to be kind of like a weird mashup. Right.
He was supposed to be out of place in the political arena. That's not what Stilgar does.
Yes.
He's a Fremen. He's a fighter. He's a man of the desert.
Through and through. And in this episode in particular, it was so frustrating because like on the writing side, there are some lines that are just awful, are just cringy and weird. The choice of storming Arrakeen, what the fuck is that?
What the fuck?
What are you doing? What is your end goal? Stilgar, like, he's like, it worked for Paul. I'll do it again. And it's so dumb. It doesn't make sense. And then there's that line, the send men to summon worms.
Oh my God.
I hated it. What the fuck was that?
Yeah.
And although the script had already basically failed the character at that point, like you can't write that scene and it makes sense through acting choices or through directing choices. You've already failed at that point from just conceiving of Stilgar doing that. But then the send men to find the worms delivery was so bracing and weird. And I'm like, either the director, Yatanes, was like on some weird fucking trip that day and was not in his right mind, or the actor made the choice, the very strong choice, and Yatanes was like, okay, all right. I mean, we don't have time for a reshoot, so let's move on to the next shot, I guess. Like, it's either the actor made a really awful choice and then, just has to live with that forever, or it was Yatane's had a very strange vision and it did not land. It kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of Eddie Redmayne talking about Jupiter Rising. Did you see that movie?
No, I've heard many terrible things about that movie.
The whole movie, he's talking like this. And
Oh, no.
in subsequent interviews, he's like, that was such a bad choice. And everyone just let me do it for the whole movie. It's like so much regret because he had this idea. Oh, my vocal cords were torn by a wolf attack. So I'm like, and the whole time. But then he looks back. He's like, it was terrible. And everyone's like, this is terrible. And he's like, yeah, no one told me.
Yeah.
So I feel like that maybe that's Stilgar in this moment. He made the choice from like an actor's perspective. Wrong choice. Wrong choice, buddy.
We all make mistakes.
Anyway, Javier Bardem. Okay. Anyway.
Let me just chew on that for a little bit.
Let me just chew on Javier Bardem. Well, okay, so that was my second pick. Thing I didn't love. And again, now that the series is over, I can say with authority, bad choices. Bad choices were made on those specific things. But as always, we've fucking tanked the mood. God, this piece of shit series, worst thing I've ever seen in my life. M. Night Shyamalan couldn't do worse than this fucking trash.
Well,
that would be the biggest twist of all, is that it is somehow worse. Let's salvage the mood in the room.
Yeah.
Favorite scene. What is your favorite scene from this episode and why?
So this was easy for me. I didn't have to think twice about it. I've hinted at it all conversation.
Yeah.
Faradin's very public dunk on his mother.
Hell yes. Yep.
On the day of his wedding. Incredible flex. Galaxy brain, genius move on his part.
Yep.
And what I liked most about it is that it made the wedding a more important moment in the story.
Yeah.
Because frankly, I think in the book, the wedding is just like a thing that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's not a thing that does happen. In the show, it is a thing that does happen. And the characters use the wedding as a moment for leverage or whatever to roar. And Faradin using the wedding, using this betrayal of his mother to get in Ganima's good graces, as we discussed earlier, is just a stroke of genius.
Brilliant.
And instantly makes the character likable.
Yeah. On so many levels. It's so good.
On so many levels.
Yeah.
And, you know, I said it earlier, feels like a cut chapter from the book because it's written so well and written so much in the characters' voices. Mm-hmm. Frankly, I'm like, add this chapter to the book, bro. Like, this is good.
For sure.
Add it in. And in addition to just an incredible moment and Faradin rising up those charts very, very quickly. There's just some beautiful and wonderful writing here, too. Just some S-tier dialogue in this scene. And I want to call out two quotes specifically.
Yeah.
The first is Faradin's amazing clapback when Winsisia calls him an insolent bastard. He responds, quote, "Let's not discuss your weaknesses now, mother." And
he emphasizes quote, "you're so heavy." He goes, "Let's not discuss your weaknesses now." And I guffawed. I laughed aloud so heartily. I paused the video. I paused it and I was like, oh my God. And I just laughed and relished the joy that line gave me.
Yeah.
So good.
Incredible.
When a parent calls a child a bastard and the clapback is, "Let's not discuss your weaknesses." Fucking Lord. Oh,
so good. Such an amazing line of dialogue.
Incredible. Yeah.
And then just a few seconds after that, once the betrayal is complete and the guards are taking Winsisia away, she stops in front of Jessica and makes this scathing remark.
Yeah.
Quote, "Don't you find it interesting, Jessica, how the sins of the mother bloom in the children they bear?" End quote.
Oh,
holy shit.
Yeah.
Obviously, on one level, that's a reference to what just happened.
Right.
A betrayal, a scheme, a plan within a plan by the son of the mother who's been scheming and planning this whole series.
Right, right.
But on another level, if you know about the books and Jessica's guilt about Alia, some of which comes through in the miniseries, but again, something else I think is underutilized. That guilt that she feels about Alia, that she could have been there for her daughter, that there was a way to fight Abomination because Ganima and Leto are able to fight it. The sins of the mother blooming in the child, the sins of the Bene Gesserit blooming in Alia.
Right.
Of Abomination, about not fighting it, about fearing it, about succumbing to it.
Right.
Such a good line. Another line that sort of rings to me as John Harrison flexing his knowledge of how much he understands these characters and the relationships between them. I loved it.
I spiraled from that line because I paused and I was like, that was beautiful. And then I was thinking about it. I was like, what is that? The sins of the mother bloom in the children they bear. Jessica, a sin of Jessica's could also be her betrayal of the Bene Gesserit order to give birth to Paul as like a sin, whatever. And what does that mean for Paul as a breaker of rules and an upset of the status quo for the entire universe?
Yeah.
But also Chani being this sinless, blameless, beautiful person, having Leto and Ganima, these like comically perfect characters who have no problems. They're just like, the only thing that goes wrong for them is that Ganima's cloak gets caught on a rock. Like that's the only mistake they make. So the idea of this sinless or blameless person who was more a victim than anyone, giving birth to these kids who then don't have that same baggage. But also, it's just such a good line.
So good.
That really started me thinking down a few routes, which was fun.
Yeah. Just one sentence with layers upon layers of meaning.
Right.
Beautiful stuff. So that was my favorite scene. What about you?
Basically the same scene. Dunking on his mom. Farad'n dunking on his mom was like peak entertainment. I was like, this is spectacular. 12 out of 10. Love it. This whole series. Masterpiece. But rather than kind of talking through all the things you've basically already said, I did want to celebrate Leto 2 confronting Alia at the end. Because while I think you're right that it is a deeply flawed scene that really goes back on a lot of like what is important in Dune, there were moments that I really loved. Like there are some goofy choices. The worm roar, fully unnecessary.
Yep.
Exactly bad. Exactly precisely bad. And really shocking that everyone involved was like, he comes into the room and he roars. Like a worm? Why?
Right.
To prevent fight. No, he fights them after worm roaring. What does the roar do? And John was like, all right, bet. There's another one, adding another roar. There are some goofy choices. And maybe it was just because I was like, well, this is not the book anymore. I'm just going to watch this. And as like a viewer, it was a lot of fun. The sequence of events, basically following the roar, was like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Like there are some real moments of heart, right? Aaron Harkonnen's voice coming out of the like writhing exorcist body of Alia was properly spooky. The growing skin that initially bothered me was in this scene in particular. I was just noticing how much of his shoulders it had taken over. So like that was really effective. Just watching him beat the snot out of those guards, just like whipping around. I was like, this is anime. This is fun stuff. And in the book, he just chucks a door. We see the remnants of him taking out a bunch of guards, but the guards in the room are like, we're going to stop. And then he throws like a 12-ton door and it doesn't hit anybody, but it's just such a show of force that no one fucks with him. That's fine as a book. Sure. Great. But in a visual medium, I do want to see him whipping around the room, beating the shit out of people.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
That's such a better choice. And I think that the throwing herself from her keep, where she spent all of those times just looking down on the city, and that's like where her schemings happen, the literal fall.
Yeah.
There are so many reasons why it's better than the knife, but the knife made it so much more personal and so much more visceral. And the fact that Leto was vulnerable to potentially being stabbed in the heart and dying was an addition to the dynamics of that little scene that I really appreciated. Jessica doesn't exist as a character in this, so her being there didn't really mean anything.
Right.
And also, I really hated that her "please help me" sounded just like her. In the book, it's horrifying, like legitimately made it hard to go to sleep that night, because the idea of someone twisting into her little like, oh, mother, please, I'm just a little girl. Help. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, God,
Oh,
that's
God.
fucking Baron Harkonnen in her daughter's skin being like, oh, help me, mother,
Yeah.
is so fucking scary. In this, it just was like, oh, she's asking for help because she's exorcist dancing. She's like having a little moment. That didn't really work for me, but there were enough moments in that final scene that I was like, oh, this is actually really, I like this little choice, or like this little thing here, that little thing there.
Yeah.
James McAvoy clearly demonstrates his super strength because he's carrying these scenes. He's single-handedly carrying this franchise. So anyway, that was my pick. Just wanted to shout out some of those final little moments.
For sure.
And yeah, golly, that's basically it. That's the episode. I think in summary, to kind of put a bow on everything, what are your thoughts about the whole miniseries, the whole work of art, now that we've consumed it first minute to last?
It's tough for me. We've now spent many hours consuming and scripting and breaking down and analyzing and discussing this series. And unfortunately, I'm walking away with a bad taste in my mouth.
Sure.
Which is sad, because I don't want that to be the case. I just think the show here in this third episode completely fumbled the ball at the 1 yard line. Like, it was so close to that touchdown, and it just didn't score. And this last episode was just so egregious in so many ways that I ultimately am walking away dissatisfied.
Sure.
And that's sad, because I liked so much of episode 2, and right. I'm a sucker for Messiah, you know?
Yeah.
Episode 1 was good in so many ways. And those things still hold true, and those opinions still hold true for me as well. But looking at it as a whole package now, I can't help but be tainted by this third episode. And I equate it to something like Dexter or Lost, sure. TV shows that
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones season 8, right? Like
Star Wars movies.
The Star Wars movies, episode 9.
Yeah.
Like, you still love the thing, and you always will.
Yeah.
I loved so much of Dexter. Lost was like transformative for me as a kid watching.
Lost was fucking great. I loved Lost.
Honestly, this is maybe too hot of a take, but I still think Lost is maybe one of the best, not one of, like, the best thing made for TV. I don't know that I've topped it. Until the end, until the end of Dexter, the last season of Dexter, the last season of Lost, the last season of Game of Thrones. Fumbling the ball so dramatically that it taints the rest of your show is honestly a bit of an achievement. And it makes me sad, because it's a shame, but I'm walking away having enjoyed my time with the series, but knowing that I will never revisit it because I know how it ends.
Right.
And it's the same with Dexter. It's the same with Lost. It's the same with Game of Thrones.
It's hard because I want to be able to recommend this to someone, someone who's like, oh, I just finished reading Children of Dune. I want to be like, oh my God, check out the miniseries.
Yeah.
And I feel like now I'd have to say, check out the miniseries. There's a lot of good, but the last part's a little weak.
Yeah, there's like a big caveat you have to include now.
And it just sucks to have a caveat, a footnote, as you said, right at the end there.
Yeah. Which, like, you don't have with something like Villeneuve's movie.
Right.
You can be like, oh, you're a Dune fan? You have to watch this.
Right.
And I think if you're a Children of Dune fan, you don't necessarily have to watch it. Depending on how much of a fan you are, I'd say you should watch it and enjoy the parts of it that are good. But what about you? What's your zoomed out overall feelings about the series?
I mean, same thing. I give it 4 out of 5 worm roars. Overall, I love this miniseries. And I think that if someone read Children of Dune and said, should I watch this miniseries? I'd be like, yes. Partially because James McAvoy is Leto too. And that's fucking crazy. Like, that's just a wild thing. When my girlfriend found out that there was a miniseries, she was like, and James McAvoy? And I was like, yeah, yep.
He's a big selling point. He's excellent in this.
He's spectacular in it. And there are so many good things in the first 2 episodes. And I also really wonder if we're ever going to get a proper adaptation of Children of Dune. So it's like, if someone was like, should I watch the SyFy miniseries adaptation of Dune? I'd be like, wait till you've seen Villeneuve's part 2 because we are on the cusp of having a better, I think, overall representation of what the book is.
So true.
Compared to that, do I think that in the next even 5 years, we'll be any closer to having a great representation on screen of Children of Dune, the book that is already a very hard book to adapt? That worm skin is a whole thing you gotta do.
It's a whole thing.
And there's literal incest plot lines that, while not on screen kissing, is part of the many conversations. And in the book, they're 9. So it's like, oh, these 9-year-olds, let's make them fuck each other. And then this 9-year-old girl says to that adult, we're going to have kids together, you and I. And he's like,
Right.
So like, those are things that you have to reconcile. I don't know. I really loved the miniseries. The third act sucked. There are definitely parts of the third act that I wish were better.
Yeah.
But like John Harrison just demonstrated, he understands the characters and the important narrative lines really incredibly. Like the last episode, right? The fact that he summarized all of Messiah's complicated plots within plots down to like, this is what is happening.
Right.
Spectacular.
Amazing.
Like, oh my God, that's incredible. But dumbing these things down or simplifying important conversations and bringing really important, magnificent characters down to just like almost caricatures, which Dune is, I think, very good at dodging on the page.
Yeah, it's tough.
Is tough. And now I think for myself as well, although I still very much enjoyed the overall thing, and I think I still would very much recommend this to pretty much anybody who's read Children of Dune, I now officially have a caveat. Yep. And I now officially have a footnote to my recommendation. P.S. I apologize in advance for the way that the third episode
buckle
ends.
Up.
Have a third glass of wine, eat a gummy, microdose, whatever it takes. That third act that's going to take something. You need to be high on spice to really see what's happening.
Yeah. I think the only thing we can say at the end of all of this, at the end of this journey, is Jackaroodoo!
Jackaroodoo! We put our hands together. We fist bump in on the table. Jackaroodoo! Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the Golden Path.